The atmosphere was serene, almost deceptively peaceful. The sun had not yet fully risen, but a gentle orange glow had already begun to spread across the vast African sky. The helicopter carrying President Ibrahim Tarore back from a classified location was navigating through a magnificent mountain range that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the horizon. Inside the cockpit, silence reigned supreme, broken only by the steady, rhythmic hum of the rotor blades that echoed through the desolate valley below. Ibrahim Tarore sat in his designated seat, carefully studying maps and coded documents that held the future of his nation within their pages. His face bore the unmistakable marks of exhaustion, the weight of leadership etched into every line and wrinkle. Yet his eyes still burned with that same fire that had sustained his people's hope for the past 2 years. His love for his homeland and its people was evident in every gesture, every breath, every moment of contemplation. This was a man who had dedicated his entire existence to the liberation and prosperity of his nation. Only moments had passed when suddenly the pilot cast an anxious glance toward the front windscreen. His voice crackled through the receiver with controlled urgency. "Unidentified object, approaching fast from 3 o'clock. Ibrahim immediately turned his head, his military instincts kicking in. Within mere seconds, a small dark shadow streaked past from the right side, and then a tremendous explosion rocked the helicopter near its tail section. The aircraft lurched violently, nosediving toward the earth below. Inside the cabin, lights began flickering erratically as warning alarms blared with deafening intensity. The pilot struggled desperately to regain control, his hands working frantically across the instrument panel. But the damage to the tail section was catastrophic, potentially fatal. "Emergency! Emergency! Mayday! Mayday!" came the final transmission. Those were the last coherent words from the cockpit. Ibrahim quickly unfastened his seatbelt, his mind racing with crystal-clear precision. He understood immediately that this might be his final moment on Earth. The helicopter was plummeting rapidly toward the ground, spinning out of control. With remarkable presence of mind, he reached for the emergency kit and extracted a parachute. His fingers worked with practiced efficiency as he strapped it on, and when the helicopter was barely 100 feet above the dense forest canopy, he smashed through the window and leapt into the void. The parachute deployed just moments before impact with the ground. His body absorbed a tremendous shock, but his life was spared by quick thinking and decisive action. His sharp mind had granted him the capability to assess and react to the life-threatening situation with remarkable composure. Below stretched an impenetrable jungle. Ibrahim crashed through tree branches, became entangled in thick undergrowth, and finally landed on relatively soft earth. His shoulder had sustained a significant injury, but he remained conscious and alert. He struggled to regain his composure and assess his situation. Seconds later, the sound of a massive explosion echoed from behind him. Flames shot skyward, touching the clouds above. His helicopter had been completely destroyed, consumed by fire and twisted metal. The pilot likely perished instantly at the crash site. Ibrahim could have easily shared that fate, but his timely action had saved his life. Lying on the jungle floor, Ibrahim slowly closed his eyes. His breathing was labored and rapid, his heart pounding against his rib cage like a war drum. The surrounding area was eerily quiet, save for the distant cries of disturbed birds and the acrid smell of gunpowder that permeated the air. He had already begun to understand that this was no mere accident or random attack, but rather a carefully orchestrated assassination attempt. He made a silent vow to himself: If he survived this ordeal, he would ensure that those responsible would face justice. His body was wounded, blood seeping from his shoulder injury. But Ibrahim forced himself to open his eyes fully and take stock of his surroundings. He found himself beneath the protective canopy of tall trees, their branches forming a natural shelter above him. The ground was damp with morning dew, and the air carried not only the smell of explosives, but also the acrid scent of burning vegetation. He remained perfectly still, as if he had become one with the earth itself. His ears were attuned to every sound in the wilderness around him: the cries of birds, movements in the undergrowth, the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. It was as if nature itself was speaking the language of danger and warning. He carefully shifted his position, sending a wave of pain coursing through his entire body. Despite his strength and resilience, he was still human, still vulnerable to injury and suffering. When he placed his hand on his shoulder, his fingers came away wet with blood. The muscle had likely been torn, or there was a deep internal laceration. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes, but he refused to allow himself even a moment of unconsciousness, knowing that unconsciousness would mean certain death. Every passing moment increased the likelihood that his enemies were closing in on his position. A jungle is not merely a collection of trees and vegetation. Here, every leaf, every sound could either betray an enemy's location or provide the key to survival. He carefully crawled behind a massive tree trunk, where dense shrubs provided additional concealment. There he began to regulate his breathing and gather his strength. His thirst was becoming severe, his tongue dry, but there was no sign of water anywhere in the immediate vicinity. A bird perched on a branch directly overhead, repeatedly striking the bark with its beak before taking flight, as if trying to alert someone to his presence. Ibrahim looked up at the sky. The sun had now fully risen, its rays intense and unforgiving, but the thick canopy of leaves prevented most of the sunlight from reaching the forest floor. Various thoughts raced through his mind. Would he survive this ordeal? Would his name simply be remembered with the word martyr attached to it, buried in the pages of history? But these questions had no immediate answers. Suddenly, there was movement in the nearby bushes. Ibrahim instinctively reached for his belt, but his weapon had been left behind in the helicopter. He possessed only a small knife for protection. He held his breath and focused his gaze intently on the source of the disturbance. Long moments passed before a lizard darted quickly through the undergrowth and disappeared among the fallen leaves. He allowed himself a slight smile. Fear was manageable, but survival was essential. He spoke quietly to himself, finding strength in the sound of his own voice. From the shrubs he broke off a straight branch, wrapped a piece of cloth around it, and tightly bound his shoulder to stem the flow of blood. The pain intensified, but a strange sense of calm settled over his features. Now he needed to escape from this location, and every step would need to be calculated and deliberate. Time moved slowly in the jungle environment. Ibrahim had been moving steadily forward for several hours despite his fatigue and injuries. The terrain alternated between soft earth, areas choked with dense vegetation, and muddy sections where each step sank deep into the saturated ground. The pain in his shoulder had now synchronized with his breathing, but he had sworn not to stop moving forward. He had become increasingly certain that this attack was no ordinary incident. Someone from within his own circle wanted him eliminated. The midday sun filtered through the trees, creating striped shadows on the ground below. The sounds of birds had diminished, as if nature itself was trying to conceal something ominous. Within moments, Ibrahim noticed something highly unusual. On the ground before him were footprints, not the tracks of animals, but the distinct, deep impressions of military boots. These were fresh prints, as if a squad had passed through this area just hours before. He stopped immediately and crouched down to examine the evidence more closely. He touched the soil and found it still slightly warm. Nearby lay a crushed cigarette butt that had obviously been discarded hastily. The cigarette was of Israeli brand, a detail he had learned years ago during an international meeting where intelligence agencies had provided training in recognizing various identifying markers in objects. The soldier within Ibrahim was now fully awakened. He scanned the surrounding area carefully. A few steps ahead, between the trees, there was a stone wall-like slope. He approached cautiously with measured steps. Before him was a natural cave entrance, cleverly concealed by large tree roots and dense foliage. An ordinary eye would never detect it, but he knew this was no ordinary hiding place. He crouched lower, hiding behind a tree trunk, and observed the cave entrance with intense scrutiny. At the mouth of the cave, flush with the ground, he could see a thin wire, likely part of an alarm system, or perhaps marking the location of mines. Now he was certain, the enemy was here. What he witnessed next defied comprehension. Moments later, two shadows emerged from within the cave. One carried a rifle, the other held a small box. They were conversing in Hebrew, and while Ibrahim's Hebrew was limited, he recognized certain key phrases. "Everything is ready here." His breathing nearly stopped. This was not merely a hiding place, it was a complete operational center. Something significant was taking place here. He began to retreat silently, his steps carefully placed to avoid detection. His mind echoed with a single phrase: "This is not just my enemy, this is a declaration of war against my homeland." Time continued to advance relentlessly. The shadow of night had now completely enveloped the jungle. The high branches of trees obscured even the stars in the sky above. The air carried an increasing sense of moisture and foreboding. Ibrahim Tarore found a rocky slope where he could rest and catch his breath. His shoulder wound had begun to clot, but the pain continued to plague him relentlessly. He possessed no map, no communication equipment, only his experience, his memories, and the burning fire within his soul. Suddenly, his gaze fell upon a dried tree trunk bearing small scratch-like marks. To most people, these would appear to be merely wounds on the bark. But for Ibrahim, they constituted a message, part of an old code that only special individuals could decipher. These markings belonged to his former comrade Abdul Razak, who had once been part of the Desert Intelligence Unit before mysteriously disappearing. Ibrahim arranged stones near these markings in a specific pattern, sending the same message that had been established years earlier: "I am alive. I need contact. Danger is near." This was all accomplished in a highly secretive manner. Then he moved to a nearby rocky alcove where he could wait and observe. Approximately 1 hour later, there was a slight rustling in the undergrowth, and a shadow emerged from behind the foliage. Tall in stature, with a thick beard and a bow in his hands, this was Abdul Razak. "I knew you would survive." His voice carried the weight of time and experience. Ibrahim stood up, feeling relief at seeing a trusted ally. He had not expected to receive a response so quickly. The two men clasped hands firmly in greeting. "I've discovered their center," Ibrahim briefly explained. "They're not just stealing gold, they've established a complete intelligent state here," he said with a grave tone. Abdul Razak nodded knowingly. "We've suspected this for years, but we had no proof. You've demonstrated that the conspiracy is no longer limited to papers and documents." Ibrahim handed over the Israeli cigarette butt he had found. "This is Israel, and I heard two individuals speaking in Hebrew." He could say no more at that moment. The story was now moving from that night toward morning. "The gold is here," Abdul Razak said, opening his bag. It contained a covert device, a small GPS unit, and an old military map. This area was previously used as a base by French colonial forces. Below ground is an entire network of tunnels. They're probably being utilized now. "When do we enter?" Ibrahim asked with determination. "There's betrayal happening, definitely," Abdul Razak replied, straightening his back and sitting against the tunnel wall. "We need to gather evidence, videos, photographs, and if possible, capture a prisoner so the world can see that the enemy we are fighting is not ordinary. They're more dangerous than governments." Ibrahim focused his gaze downward. A drop of perspiration fell from his forehead, but his eyes remained resolute and determined. They spent the entire night at the tunnel entrance, but the lights in the underground intelligence center never dimmed. Inside the gold mine, life continued in its sinister manner, like some dark underworld city in operation. Every machine, every step, every sound testified to a level of organization that remained invisible during daylight hours, but consumed the very earth beneath their feet during the darkness of night. Ibrahim carefully extended a small camera through a crack in the tunnel. This was the lightweight wireless camera that Abdul Razak had brought in his bag. For 2 days, they recorded every moment from this vantage point. Shift changes, weapons transfers, guard positions, and those secret rooms that only select individuals were permitted to access. Everything was beginning to fall into a discernible pattern. Time passed slowly. 3 days had elapsed. Early in the morning, both men were ready to descend and infiltrate the facility. The plan was simple, but extremely dangerous. The first objective was to reach that secret room where the commander or main system was likely located, and from there, to extract information, hard drives, or at least capture one important individual. The second phase involved creating chaos and scattering the remaining group before they could organize a response. During these 3 days, they had planned extensively. As they descended through the narrow passage, both men controlled their breathing carefully. Upon reaching the bottom, they crouched against the stone wall and approached the first guard. It was essential to eliminate him silently. Ibrahim drew his knife. Crawling on the ground, he positioned himself directly behind the guard and struck once at the base of the neck. No scream, no sound. The guard's body was dragged aside, clearing the path forward. Ibrahim removed a strap from the guard's neck that contained a small GPS tracker. He hung it on a rock and continued forward, ensuring that if something went wrong, the message could reach the intelligence forces waiting in reserve. The same fate befell the next 3 guards: silent, sudden, and unmarked death. Now they stood directly in front of the door behind which the most suspicious activities were being taken place. Abdul Razak pressed his ear to the wall and listened intently. He whispered softly, 3 individuals inside, 1 sitting, 2 moving around. Ibrahim extracted a small flashbang device from his pocket. He pulled the pin, opened the door, and threw it inside. Suddenly, a brilliant flash and the sound of an explosion filled the room. All 3 individuals were disoriented and confused. Ibrahim and Abdul Razak entered with lightning speed. One was immediately subdued, the second was knocked to the ground, and the third found it wise to raise his hands in surrender. "Who are you? Who do you work for?" Ibrahim demanded in a stern tone. The man was trembling. His hands held Israeli identification cards and documents. "We're just doing our job. The real network is below, at the other end of the tunnel. I don't know anything else." Ibrahim placed his hand on the man's face and laid him down on the ground. Then he turned to Abdul Razak. "This was just the beginning. The real nest is still intact." Looking up at the camera mounted on the ceiling, he spoke softly, but with unmistakable resolve. "You see, don't you? I've returned, and I won't leave again until everything is finished." With these words, he headed toward the exit. On the other side, the atmosphere in Ouagadougou that morning was somehow different. The sun had risen as usual, but a strange silence pervaded the government buildings. At the presidential palace, where a transitional government cabinet meeting was in session, suddenly an old journalist's tweet shook everything. Ibrahim Tarore is alive. This is not just news, this is the return of revolution. Inside the palace conference room, dozens of eyes fixed on the screens. Without warning, a video began playing on a large LED screen. In the darkness of night, guards were being silently eliminated inside a mine, and Ibrahim Tarore was capturing an enemy with his own hands, saying, "This is just the beginning. I have returned." Within seconds, the video had spread throughout the entire country. Social media, television channels, radio, everywhere the same phrase was echoing. President Ibrahim is alive and has penetrated the heart of the enemy. The chief of national intelligence immediately stood up in the meeting and slammed a file on the table. How was this possible? We ourselves witnessed the destruction of his helicopter. No body was found, but there were signs of casualties. The Minister of Interior nervously turned off his mobile phone. How was this leaked? Where did this video come from? The Prime Minister's face showed complete bewilderment. If he's truly alive, then either we deceived the nation by calling him a martyr, or we ourselves are victims of some grand deception. Several people in the room were avoiding eye contact with each other. Some faces appeared clear and honest, but others showed beads of perspiration gleaming on their foreheads. The military chief spoke in a serious tone. We must acknowledge that he has not only exposed the enemy, but also revealed our own weaknesses. If Ibrahim is alive, then his being alive is a political earthquake for us. The people were already with him. Now he will become the beating heart of their hopes. On the other hand, a celebratory atmosphere was beginning to emerge on the streets among the general population. Young people on motorcycles were waving flags and chanting slogans, "Ibrahim will come, the enemy will go." In the markets, people were showing each other the video. Some were crying, others were smiling, as if hope had once again knocked on their door after years of despair. A primary school teacher in a small village showed the video to her children, and one child said, "Miss, Papa Ibrahim has come back." The teacher wiped her eyes and nodded. "Yes, now we will be free again." That same evening, a confidential news agency reported that United Nations representatives had called an emergency session because the videos that had surfaced showed not just one man, but the sound of a new African Union emerging. Ibrahim Tarore's single video had shaken the hearts of politics, media, military, and the people. And this was just a message. The real storm was yet to come. But the question remained, how had that video gone viral? Deep in the lush green valley of the jungle stood an old, dilapidated mud hut. Its roof was constructed from bamboo and dried leaves. An outside observer would assume it's simply the modest dwelling of a shepherd or farmer. But the small room inside had now become a military command center. Spread on the floor was a map, weapons leaned against the walls, and 4 different faces sat in the corners. These were the silent soldiers who had risked their lives in response to Ibrahim Tarore's call. Ibrahim's eyes had become intense, his face stern. The shoulder wound was still causing pain, but his presence indicated that he had risen above that level of physical discomfort. He struck the table with his hand and said in a loud voice, "This war is not just against the enemy, it's also against the traitors hidden among us. Those who sat silently in their chairs as mere spectators are equally guilty as the armed men hidden beneath that mine." Silence fell over the room. These soldiers had been summoned with Abdul Razak's assistance. Ibrahim bent over and pointed to the map. These are 3 internal routes, one above ground, the other 2 through tunnels, but one of these has mines and the other passes directly through the center of enemy territory. We must take the route where their position is weakest. Ibrahim nodded and said, "That's the path we'll take to enter. But this time, we're not just conducting reconnaissance, we're going to attack." He took an old but polished badge from his pocket, a genuine military insignia, and slowly pinned it to his khaki shirt. For a moment, everyone's gaze fixed on it. Now he was not just Ibrahim, he had once again become a leader. "I won't go into battle alone, you will all come with me. But remember, the moment we enter, there will be no path of return. Either we'll drag the enemy out, or we'll be buried here ourselves, but not by bowing our heads, by fighting." The 4 soldiers in the room took turns clenching their fists and placing their hands on the empty rifle frame in front of them, as if taking an oath. "At your command, sir," Abdul Razak answered for all of them. Ibrahim took a final look at everyone. Then he slowly opened the door. Outside, the night air carried a strange whisper in its blackness, as if it knew this night would be decisive, as if every tree, every leaf, every shadow stood with Ibrahim. He rolled up his shirt sleeves, tightened his belt, and whispered only this: "We didn't choose this war, but we will finish it." They all filed out behind him in a line. No uniforms, no flags, no media, no display of weapons. Only determination, honor, and silent resolve. They were going to enter the enemy's center, but this time, not to stop, but to finish the job. The shadows of night had grown deeper. The moon was hidden somewhere behind clouds, as if it too was reluctant to witness the gravity of this night. In the jungle, there was an atmosphere of profound silence, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves or the distant and unsettling sound of some animal. In this very silence, Ibrahim Tarore and his small unit, just 5 men, were advancing toward the enemy stronghold. Around the gold mine were high barbed wire fences and sensors hidden in the ground. This was not merely a mine, it was a complete underground military installation where every brick had been placed with enemy cunning. But Ibrahim now knew every detail, every wall, every tunnel construction. He could read the hidden intentions in their language. They did not possess any high-tech weapons, only simple but silent and deadly tools, a magnetic EMP device and 2 grenades. But the most dangerous weapon was their merciless intention, which is often sharper than any technology. "This is the final tunnel," Abdul Razak said quietly. "If we go through here, we can reach directly to the main power line inside." Ibrahim nodded. Crawling on his knees, he disappeared into the darkness. The others followed behind him silently. Every step was measured and calculated, every breath under control. The tunnel walls were damp, the air was heavy, but ahead a dim light was flickering. The central chamber where the computers, control room, and the enemy's brain were located. Ibrahim took out the EMP device from his pocket, placed it on the ground, and quietly set the timer. Only 45 seconds. As soon as the device activated, a blue light glowed softly, and everyone retreated. Then there was a silent explosion. No sound, just a flashing wave of electricity, and the next moment all the lights in the mine went out. Chaos erupted, sirens began wailing, guards started running, and that was the moment when Ibrahim and his companions leapt into the heart of the enemy. Darkness everywhere, screams, pandemonium. Ibrahim knocked down 2 enemies as soon as he entered the first hall. Abdul Razak extracted hard drives from the main computer. The other men freed the hands of 12 prisoners held inside. The prisoners were amazed. No one was speaking. Only their eyes held one question. "Are we free?" Ibrahim said softly, "Not yet, but you're about to be." Just then 2 enemy guards blocked their path. Gunfire erupted. Sparks flashed on the walls.
But Ibrahim and his companions, crouching low, silently eliminated them one by one. All the prisoners were brought out one by one. Time was short, and the enemy's other units were still trying to reorganize themselves. Within moments, everyone had reached the same tunnel path through which they had entered. All of this was accomplished with speed and excellent planning. Ibrahim took a final look behind him. The broken system, scattered cameras and wires hanging from the walls, everything bore witness to the night that had stolen the enemy's sleep. "Today we have only shaken them. Tomorrow we will break them," he said, and with that they silently disappeared into the darkness. The echoing footsteps in the darkness, the smell of gunpowder, and the rustling of sand beneath the ground had not yet settled. In the darkness of night, a small covert camp had been established at the edge of the jungle, where Ibrahim Tarore and his companions had returned after the previous night's operation. The prisoners had been sent to a safe location, and the hard drive was secure in the bag hanging from Ibrahim's shoulder. But that night, not only had prisoners been freed, an important enemy figure had also been captured. General Yoav Gidon, an experienced commander of the Israeli intelligence unit, the very person who had designed the gold mine operation, corrupted local systems through bribery, and was running that colony by enslaving many African youth. Now this same general sat on the ground with his hands bound in a mud tent.
His face showed no fatigue. A strange arrogance and indifference were hidden there, as if he was still not in captivity but sitting at some negotiation table. Ibrahim entered the tent. Abdul Razak was also there, but he stood silently near the door. Ibrahim slowly sat down in front of the general and looked at him. "You thought I was dead?" Ibrahim asked without any preamble. Yoav gave a bitter smile and bowed his head. "No, I knew you were alive. People like you don't die so easily. Yet you did all this by infiltrating my country?" Ibrahim's voice carried no thunder, just a strange calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. General Yoav Gidon looked around. Then he said, "We haven't done anything that hasn't happened before in the world. The powerful always take from the weak. You people can't handle gold. Neither systems nor government. We were just using your weakness." Ibrahim took a deep breath. Then, leaning forward, he said, "You people consider us weak because we're poor or because we remain silent? Listen, we've turned silence into a weapon. We've endured the pain of our land. We've carried the funerals of our mothers. We've freed our children from captivity. You can take gold, but not our souls." Yoav's tone became harsh. "You're an emotional leader, and emotions don't win wars. You people can't survive long. Your videos, your speeches, all are momentary passions. The world will forget you just as it has forgotten other revolutionaries." Ibrahim closed his eyes for a few moments. Then he picked up a handful of soil from the ground and placed it in front of Yoav. "This soil has been watered with my blood. It's made from my father's bones. You consider gold wealth, and we consider this land our mother. Now you decide, do you want wealth or an honorable death?" Yoav remained silent for several moments. Then he lowered his gaze. He now understood that in this war, something more powerful than guns was Ibrahim's faith and his people's hope. Ibrahim stood up, clenched his fist, and while leaving, said only one sentence. "Now your time is over. Now history will decide whether you'll be remembered with your crimes or buried with your silence." As he left the tent, the morning light was spreading across the horizons outside. A new day, a new war, new hope, and Ibrahim was ready not just to fight, but to achieve victory. Yoav had not been killed but captured alive. The day had advanced and sunlight was slowly spreading across the ground. But this time, this brightness was not just illumination, it was the herald of a historic revelation. Breaking news was appearing one after another on media channels worldwide. People in cafes, shops, offices, and homes were looking at television screens with amazement. Revelation of Israeli intelligence state in African gold mine. Ibrahim Tarore alive and videos recorded from the heart of enemy center. Emergency session called in UN General Assembly. New York, Geneva, Paris, Berlin, everywhere the same voice was echoing. The same footage was being shown repeatedly on every channel, recorded by Ibrahim's camera unit inside the mine. It contained the chained condition of workers, Israeli tech codes printed on machines, and excerpts from General Yoav Gideon's confessions. Everything was there. They had recorded everything and delivered it to the media. The United Nations General Assembly Hall was packed that day. We acknowledge the reality that Ibrahim Tarore, by becoming the voice of an oppressed nation, has not only saved his homeland, but has also shaken the conscience of the entire world. This is not just one nation's matter, it has become humanity's cause. These were the words of the UN Secretary-General echoing in the General Assembly that day. Ibrahim himself was not present there, but his presence was being felt everywhere. His message, his videos had forced the world's media, politicians, and human rights activists to wake up. A young member of the French parliament said, "We looted Africa for centuries, and when it cried out, we called it terrorist. The truth of Ibrahim Tarore is a question mark on our conscience." Germany's foreign minister said boldly, "If Israel has indeed conducted covert operations in Africa, it should be presented before the International Court of Justice." On the other side, the Israeli representative remained silent. To every question, he gave only one answer: "These videos could be edited. We should be given a chance to clarify." But the world's decision had been made. During this time, the streets of Ouagadougou were filled with an ocean of humanity. Women in homes were praying, children were carrying Ibrahim's posters and chanting slogans, "Come back, Ibrahim, now you are our only hope." Shortly after, a special news was published. The African Union has decided to award Ibrahim Tarore the title of Hero of Africa. The cameras entered that jungle where there was a small camp. Ibrahim was sitting there in simple clothes in front of a map spread on the ground. There was no smile on his face because he knew the war was not yet over. This was just the first step. The morning in Ouagadougou was different today. The sun was not just shining in the sky, but in people's eyes, on their faces, and in their hearts. The nation that had been silently suffering in darkness until yesterday was speaking today, not with slogans or noise, but with the voice of dignity. In an open field in the center of the capital, thousands of people had gathered. Children, women, elderly, soldiers, and those farmers whose hands once held only plows now held honor in their hands. In the center of the stage was a simple wooden platform where there was no flag, no pomp, just one chair, and sitting on it was Ibrahim Tarore, light-colored simple clothing, an old cloth on his shoulder, peace in his eyes, and that silence on his face that only belongs to winners. On one side of the stage, General Yoav stood chained. The world's eyes were on him. UN observers, African Union representatives, rows of international journalists, all were waiting to see what decision Ibrahim would announce. Ibrahim stood up. He held no paper in his hands, no written speech. He just kept looking at the people. Then he spoke slowly. "I picked up the gun so I could free my people from slavery. But if the gun itself becomes our justice, then we too will become like those we fought against." He looked toward General Yoav. Then, addressing the entire world, he said, "This person is a criminal, and his hands are stained with my people's blood. But I will not kill him with a bullet. I will defeat him with justice." Silence fell over the field. Everyone was surprised. Perhaps no one had expected this decision. Ibrahim continued, "We will present him before the International Court of Justice, where every eye, every conscience will see that Africa's sons no longer sell themselves, no longer bow down, but rise up. They demand their rights with law, with dignity." For the first time, lines of shame appeared in General Yoav's eyes. The man who considered himself invincible was now breaking in front of a simple, peaceful person. Ibrahim looked at the gathering again, and in his final words, did what nations learn not from books, but from history. "We have saved the land. Now it's time to free our souls. The war is over. Now we must become a nation, not from soil, but from conscience." No applause rang out. No slogans were chanted. Only tears fell from eyes, hearts lightened, and a chapter of history was completed. After that day, Ibrahim Tarore was called neither president, nor general, nor commander. People addressed him by only one name, Zamir de Africa, the conscience of Africa. Years have passed since that historic day when Ibrahim Tarore chose justice over vengeance, law over lawlessness, and dignity over destruction. The International Court of Justice found General Yoav Gidon guilty of crimes against humanity, illegal exploitation of natural resources, and human trafficking. His conviction sent shockwaves through intelligence agencies worldwide and established new precedents for international law. The gold mine was returned to the people of Burkina Faso, and its profits were used to build schools, hospitals, and infrastructure throughout the country. The underground tunnel network was converted into a museum, a testament to the resilience of the African people and their struggle for freedom. Ibrahim Tarore never sought to become president again. Instead, he established the African Continental Liberation Movement, a peaceful organization dedicated to exposing neo-colonial exploitation and empowering African nations to control their own resources. His philosophy of silent strength became a model for resistance movements across the continent. The video footage from the mine operation became part of a documentary that won international acclaim and was screened at the United Nations. It served as an irrefutable evidence of how modern colonial powers continue to exploit African resources while maintaining a facade of legitimate business operations. Today, statues of Ibrahim Tarore stand in capitals across Africa, not as monuments to war, but as symbols of peaceful resistance and the power of conscience over conquest. His famous words, "We can take gold, but not our souls," are inscribed in the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. The children who once carried his posters through the streets of Ouagadougou are now adults, working as teachers, doctors, engineers, and leaders. They tell their own children the story of the man who fell from the sky, survived in the jungle, and chose to heal rather than harm, to unite rather than divide. In the end, Ibrahim Tarore proved that true victory comes not from defeating an enemy, but from remaining true to one's principles even when faced with the greatest temptations for revenge. His legacy continues to inspire movements for justice and dignity across Africa and around the world. The conscience of Africa had spoken, and the world had listened. And in listening, it had learned that the greatest revolutions are not won with bullets, but with the unwavering commitment to justice and human dignity. The impact of Ibrahim Tarore's actions extended far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. Within months of the International Court's verdict, similar operations were uncovered in Mali, Niger, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The Tarore model of investigation, combining grassroots intelligence with international legal frameworks, became the standard for exposing resource exploitation across the continent. In the depths of the Sahara, where uranium mines had operated under suspicious circumstances for decades, local communities began organizing. They remembered Ibrahim's words, "Every grain of sand knows its homeland." Armed with cameras instead of weapons, they documented working conditions, traced supply chains, and presented evidence to international bodies. The footage they captured revealed conditions strikingly similar to those found in the Burkina Faso gold mine. Dr. Amina Kone, a professor of international law at the University of Ouagadougou, often spoke about the Ibrahim Doctrine in her lectures. What Ibrahim showed us is that sovereignty is not just about controlling your borders, it's about knowing what happens beneath your soil, understanding who benefits from your resources, and ensuring that your people's dignity is never negotiable. The transformation was not limited to mining operations. Across West Africa, fishing communities began questioning the large foreign trawlers that had depleted their coastal waters for generations. Farmers organized to challenge land-grabbing schemes disguised as agricultural development projects. In each case, they followed Ibrahim's methodology: gather evidence, build international support, and pursued justice through legal channels rather than violence. The hard drives recovered from the underground facility revealed a vast network of similar operations spanning 3 continents. Coded communications pointed to coordinated efforts involving shell companies, bribed officials, and systematic resource extraction that had been ongoing for over 20 years. Abdul Razak, now serving as Director of Continental Security for the African Union, spent months decoding the information. What we discovered, he would later testify before a special UN commission, was not just corruption, but a parallel economic system designed to bypass African sovereignty entirely. The network had tentacles reaching into European banks, American investment firms, and Middle Eastern trading companies. It operated through a complex web of subsidiaries and front organizations, making it nearly impossible to trace the ultimate beneficiaries of the extracted wealth. But Ibrahim's methodical approach to gathering evidence had provided the key to unraveling the entire system. In Geneva, investigative journalist Maria Santos published a series of articles that she titled "The Underground Empire." Her work, based heavily on the recovered documents, revealed how legitimate mining operations were used as cover for intelligence gathering, arms trafficking, and human trafficking operations. The gold mine in Burkina Faso, she wrote, was just the tip of an iceberg that extends deep into the global economy. The International Criminal Court in The Hague had never seen a case quite like this one. General Yoav Gadon's trial became known as the trial of the century, not just because of the crimes alleged, but because of what it represented: the first time an African nation had successfully prosecuted a foreign intelligence officer for resource theft and crimes against humanity on African soil. The prosecution was led by Fatima al-Rashid, a brilliant legal mind from Sudan who had spent years building cases against war criminals. She approached the Gadon case with meticulous preparation, understanding that a conviction would set precedents that could reshape international law regarding resource exploitation and neocolonialism. This case, she argued in her opening statement, is about more than one mine or one man. It's about whether the international community will finally acknowledge that the systematic theft of African resources constitutes a crime against humanity, whether conducted by corporations, intelligence agencies, or individual actors. The evidence was overwhelming. Satellite imagery showed the expansion of the mining operation far beyond any legitimate commercial scope. Financial records revealed payments to militias and corrupt officials. Most damaging of all were General Gadon's own recorded conversations, captured by Ibrahim's surveillance equipment, in which he discussed using forced labor and eliminating problematic local leaders. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from the freed prisoners themselves. 12 men who had been forced to work in the underground facility for months, some for over a year, told their stories to the International Court. Their accounts of brutality, starvation, and psychological torture painted a picture of systematic dehumanization that shocked even experienced war crimes prosecutors. As the trial proceeded, something unprecedented began happening around the world. African diaspora communities in major cities organized massive demonstrations outside the embassies of countries implicated in the network. In London, Paris, New York, and Toronto, protesters carried signs reading, "We are all Ibrahim," and "Africa is not for sale." The movement transcended traditional political boundaries. Conservative politicians found themselves agreeing with progressive activists that something fundamental had to change in how the international community approached African sovereignty. Business leaders who had previously turned a blind eye to questionable supply chains began demanding transparency from their African partners. Universities across the globe began offering courses on resource justice and the Tarore model of peaceful resistance. Students studying international relations learned about Ibrahim's systematic approach to gathering evidence, his strategic use of media, and his principled commitment to legal rather than violent solutions. In Silicon Valley, tech entrepreneurs developed apps that allowed ordinary citizens to trace the supply chains of products they purchased, identifying items that might be connected to exploitative practices. The hashtag #BloodFree Supply Chain movement gained millions of followers worldwide. 1 year after General Gidon's conviction, the African Union called for an extraordinary Continental Congress in Accra, Ghana. For the first time in the organization's history, the agenda focused exclusively on a single issue: establishing permanent mechanisms to prevent foreign exploitation of African resources. Delegates from all 54 African nations gathered in the sprawling conference center that had been built with revenues from Ghana's newly transparent gold mining operations. The symbolism was intentional. This was African wealth being used to serve African interests. Abdul Raraway was invited as the keynote speaker, though he initially declined, preferring to remain focused on grassroots organizing rather than high-level diplomacy. It was only after personal appeals from several heads of state that he agreed to address the Congress. His speech, delivered in simple clothing without notes or teleprompters, lasted just 15 minutes. But those 15 minutes would be quoted, analyzed, and remembered for generations. My brothers and sisters, we have proven that Africa is not helpless. We have shown that when we unite behind justice rather than division, when we choose law over lawlessness, when we demand dignity rather than accepting exploitation, the world listens. But our work is not finished. Today we celebrate one victory, but tomorrow we must build the systems that will prevent 1,000 defeats. We must create institutions that cannot be corrupted, legal frameworks that cannot be bypassed, and a continental consciousness that cannot be divided. The gold in our soil is finite, but the strength in our hearts is limitless. The diamonds in our earth will one day be exhausted, but the brilliance of our unity will shine forever. We are not just protecting our resources, we are protecting our children's future. The Accra Congress resulted in the establishment of the Continental Resource Monitoring Authority, or CRMA, the first Pan-African institution with the power to investigate and prosecute resource-related crimes across national boundaries. Headquartered in Kigali, Rwanda, the CRMA was granted unprecedented authority to audit mining operations, investigate suspicious financial flows, and coordinate with international law enforcement agencies. The authority was structured to prevent the corruption that had plagued previous continental initiatives. Its leadership rotated every 3 years among different regions. Its funding came from a percentage of verified ethical resource exports, and its operations were subject to constant oversight by civil society organizations. Within its first year, the CRMA uncovered and shut down 17 illegal mining operations, recovered over $2 billion in stolen assets, and facilitated the repatriation of hundreds of trafficked workers. The Tarore protocols for evidence gathering became standard procedure for investigators across the continent. But the authorities' greatest success was not in shutting down illegal operations, but in helping legitimate businesses operate transparently. Companies that met the CRMA's ethical standards received certification that became highly valued in international markets. Tarore-certified products commanded premium prices and preferential treatment from socially conscious investors. Perhaps the most lasting impact of Ibrahim's actions was in the realm of education. The Ibrahim Tarore Institute for African Studies, established with recovered assets from illegal mining operations, became a leading center for research on resource governance, conflict resolution, and sustainable development. The institute pioneered a new approach to education that combined traditional African knowledge systems with modern technology and international best practices. Students from across the continent came to study applied sovereignty, the practical skills needed to protect national resources while engaging constructively with the global economy. The curriculum included courses on forensic accounting, investigative journalism, international law, and peaceful resistance techniques. But it also emphasized African history, philosophy, and cultural values. Students learned not just how to detect and prevent exploitation, but why such work was essential to African dignity and self-determination. Graduates of the institute became known as Tarore scholars and were highly sought after by governments, international organizations, and civil society groups. They formed a network of professionals committed to the principles Ibrahim had embodied: meticulous preparation, peaceful methods, and unwavering commitment to justice. 10 years after the gold mine liberation, a new generation of African leaders had emerged who had been directly inspired by Ibrahim's example. They brought a different approach to governments, one that prioritized transparency, citizen engagement, and long-term sustainability over short-term political gains. President Amara Diallo of Senegal, elected at age 34, was typical of this new generation. During her campaign, she frequently quoted Ibrahim's principle that leadership is not about commanding others, but about serving something greater than yourself. Her administration implemented radical transparency measures, including real-time public access to government contracts and resource extraction agreements. Similar leaders emerged across the continent. In Zambia, President Michael Firi established the world's first completely transparent mining industry, where every ton of copper extracted, every dollar earned, and every job created was tracked in real time on a public blockchain. In Nigeria, Governor Kemi Adebayo of Lagos State created an anti-corruption system so effective that it became a model for other African cities. These leaders did not always succeed, and they faced enormous challenges from entrenched interests, both domestic and foreign. But they shared a common commitment to the principles Ibrahim had demonstrated: that African problems required African solutions, that justice was more powerful than violence, and that transparency was the foundation of true sovereignty. The success of the African resource governance revolution had ripple effects far beyond the continent. Indigenous communities in Latin America began using the Tarore model to challenge illegal logging and mining operations in their territories. Pacific Island nations employed similar techniques to document and prosecute illegal fishing in their waters. In Southeast Asia, environmental activists adapted Ibrahim's systematic approach to evidence gathering to expose palm oil plantations that were destroying rainforests and displacing local communities. The Tarore protocols became a standard tool for grassroots organizations worldwide seeking to challenge corporate exploitation through legal rather than violent means. International business schools began teaching case studies based on the Burkina Faso gold mine operation. MBA students learned how a small group of determined individuals with limited resources had exposed and dismantled a multi-billion-dollar criminal network through careful planning, strategic thinking, and principled action. The United Nations established the Ibrahim Tarore Prize for Peaceful Resistance, awarded annually to individuals or groups who demonstrated exceptional courage in exposing injustice through nonviolent means. The first recipients included a group of fishermen from the Philippines who had documented Chinese illegal fishing activities, and a network of women from the Democratic Republic of Congo who had exposed systematic sexual violence in mining operations. Today, Ibrahim Tarore lives quietly in a modest house on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. He tends a small garden, teaches occasional classes at the local university, and spends much of his time mentoring young activists from across Africa. Visitors are often surprised by his humility and his reluctance to discuss his own role in the transformation of the continent. "I was just one man," he often tells them, "who chose to act when action was needed. The real heroes are the millions of Africans who decided to believe in themselves, to demand better from their leaders, and to take responsibility for their continent's future." The gold mine where it all began has been converted into a peace park and education center. Visitors from around the world come to see the tunnels where systematic exploitation was exposed, the cave where evidence was gathered, and the simple mud hut where the liberation was planned. But the most popular attraction is a small garden where Ibrahim planted a tree from each of the 54 African nations. The tree from Burkina Faso, planted first, has grown the tallest. Its branches now shelter trees from across the continent, creating a living symbol of African unity and strength. Children who visit often ask their guides why this tree is so much bigger than the others. The guides always give the same answer, passed down from Ibrahim himself. It grew first because it was planted in soil that had been watered with tears of suffering. But it grew strong because it was nurtured with hope, protected with courage, and tended with love. As the sun sets over the Peace Park each evening, the silhouette of that great tree stretches across the ground where once there had only been exploitation and despair. In that shadow, African children play games, students read books, and elders tell stories of the day when one man's choice to act with conscience rather than vengeance changed the trajectory of an entire continent. The conscience of Africa had spoken, and the world had listened. And in listening, it had learned that the greatest revolutions are not won with bullets, but with the unwavering commitment to justice, dignity, and the belief that every human being deserves to benefit from the wealth of the land where they were born. Ibrahim Tarore had given Africa something more valuable than gold. He had given it back its soul.